Most SaaS companies lose money because they pick the wrong thing to put the price tag on. And that's where Dan Balcauski is here to help us out. Dan is the pricing strategist that B2B founders call when just copy the competitor fails. And he's the founder of Tranquility.com. And today on the Marketer of the Day podcast, I'm your host, Robert Plank. Dan and I will dive into why freemium is broken. And we're also sponsored by DFYpodcast.com, who removes the tech barriers so you can focus on those podcasting conversations. And the conversation that Dan and I will have today is about this common pricing trap, about how freemium is everywhere, but it almost never works, invisible tax, value metrics, and so much more. So, Mr. Dan, glad to see you. How the heck are you?
I'm doing really well, Robert. Thanks for having me today.
Happy to have you. And so in that introduction, what did I leave out? What are you all about? What's your focus and passion?
Well, you pretty much nailed it. I focus on helping B2B SaaS CEOs define pricing and packaging for new products. And, I've been in the tech space my entire career, so this is not new for me. I've seen a couple of different iterations and waves over my career now. Started off more on the builder side as an engineer, quickly realized that the computer didn't care how mad I got at it. It still would run my code. Eventually decided that I wanted to focus more on why do companies buy certain products? Why does that translate into viable businesses? How do companies turn the products they're selling into dollars and cents for the business? And how does that make sense for customers?
Well, very cool. We can learn a lot from you, right? We can learn about how our pricing could be better or how our positioning could be better. And even as we were hitting the record button on this, just my subconscious just started filling up with all this SaaS software that I use. And it seems to all be SaaS software, right? It used to be, hey, I own Photoshop, I own Camtasia, I pay the $300, I pay the $600, but then they said, hey, software goes out of date. We need to update it. Now Adobe's a subscription for $60 a month, right? Now you and I use tools like Descript and so much more. It's all this kind of monthly recurring subscription. And that seems a lot trickier, right? Where before you just be like, hey, Microsoft Office costs this, Microsoft Windows costs that, but now it's all changed. So why is that? And what's the current sort of pricing situation these days?
Well, those are really big questions. What you described is over the last, I would say, 20 years, probably most started with Mark Benioff at Salesforce, where he had his big logo of no software, which is kind of funny because Salesforce is a software company. But really what he was hinting at there was this idea that it's much more amenable for customers, but also for companies to think of these as a recurring relationship, recurring transaction of value. And so this idea of a perpetual license, right? You get the bits, but then you're fundamentally responsible for, especially in a B2B context, often provisioning the infrastructure, making sure that that system stays up and running, and managing any updates or upgrades. The subscription model really helped align the value capture and value delivery. So it really aligned the vendor and the buyer together in a continual evolution, because it made it such that for customers, you didn't need this incredibly large CapEx expense upfront to purchase, for B2B software. I mean, that could easily be in the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Instead, you could pay a much more reasonable upfront monthly or annual subscription. If the product wasn't providing value for you, you cancel, move on. And so what did that do? That had created a strong incentive for businesses to really care if their customers were successful, because the math, just if you look at perpetual versus subscription, the math doesn't math if your customers leave you after a month or after a year. They need to stick around and continue renewing year after year in order to make the financial model work out. And that really puts an incentive on behalf of the vendors to make sure that, hey, not only we didn't just sell some shelfware that never got installed, never got deployed, no one ever got the value we promised, but that folks are still using it, still getting value out of it months and years later.
Ooh, that's a nice reframe, right? Where it is easy to poo poo on the monthly subscription world that we live in, but you're saying, well, hey, it's a trade off that now the vendor and the buyer, they're more aligned, and they're kind of in this together as far as continuously improving this, and it's a less upfront cost because it's monthly instead of one time, and everyone has to maintain stuff, right? Even like you said, provisioning the people using the software within the organization, like it is living and breathing, and so we are living in that world, and so there's a lot of ways to go wrong with this. However, isn't there? Because man, freemium, it seems like it was such a buzzword for such a long time, and then Dropbox got all this glory, but then. And I'm pretty sure, I think I still pay like $20 a month for Dropbox, but I'm just afraid to cancel it, right? I think I pay like 12 a month for Google Drive. I'm like, well, it's there. It hits my account. I don't feel good, but it's kind of there. And I think that, Asana in particular, I've been using this free version for like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. I think I've got like 20 people in my workspace, and it always says like, hey, you got these extra features. You can pay like this amount per seat. And they like turn on the features for a while, then they turn it back off. And I'm just like, I'm really confused. And so I don't know, freemium, I've never been really that impressed. I've read a couple books on it where that's all they talk about. I'm like, I still don't really get it. And so what's your take on it with the freemium? And is it like too cutesy? Is it too much? What's the deal with freemium?
Well, I was lucky. So in my transition from the world of engineering into product management, I was pursued an MBA, and during that MBA, I had an opportunity to do an internship for a successful Silicon Valley startup. And that summer, among several things I worked on for that company, a question sitting on the CEO's desk was, should they pursue a freemium approach? And so, I went into it without knowing anything. I consumed all the TechCrunch headlines at the time where you had these companies, founders shouting from the rooftops how successful they were. Well, one thing I quickly noticed in reading and kind of peeling back the layers of those success stories was you'd often hear people talking about how many users they acquired. Rarely would they talk about how financially lucrative that approach was. And really what I realized is that freemium is really a broken model in most circumstances. Keep in mind, I focus mostly or entirely at this point on B2B software companies. Freemium probably it likely is one of these things that sometimes works in a B2C context, but rarely ever translates over into B2B. So why do folks adopt it if that's the case? Well, one, they get snowed over by folks who don't really peek below the headlines that much, right? It's like, oh, we had all the success. They talk about the user growth, but not necessarily the financial growth. And if we think about what freemium does, we think about software as an experience good. What does that mean? An experience good is a classification used by economists that really says, hey, your perception of the value of this service changes when you get it. Very relatable B2C circumstance. Maybe you go get a haircut, right? Like, I don't know, you got great cuts or any number of different barbershops you could go to, and you're kind of don't know if you haven't been to that stylist or barber before how you're going to feel at the end of it. So we have this type of situation, all around us, right? We could think about maybe going to a new restaurant, right? Like, okay, I heard it's good, but I don't really know. And so the idea behind freemium and free trials is this idea that we can give our customers a sense of what the product's value is by having them use it and really get their data into it. Because we have, no matter how good your marketing team is making intro videos, websites, white papers, etc., there's something that clicks in our brain when we hit that activation point, that aha point in a product. It really shows, oh, now I get why this product is useful or valuable. I brought up free trials versus freemium. I'm really a big fan of free trials. The main distinction with a free trial is usually there's a burning fuse. It's usually time bound, where I'm giving you access to the product for, say, 14 to 30 days. And at the end of that point, you have to make a decision. Is this thing providing value? Yes or no? Freemium doesn't do that. Freemium just allows you to continue using a stripped down version of the product indefinitely. And this creates a whole bunch of challenges. So first challenge is that the metrics sort of belie the fact that this extended amount of use will eventually get all these customers to convert. If you look at freemium products, most of them, if you look at like the time period that their free users converted to paid, the vast majority, 90+% of those, are within the time period they would have had a free trial. They're making the decision really quickly. And then there's this really slow bleed over, if anything, going beyond that. And so best in class freemium companies will report somewhere between 1% and 3% of free users that convert to paid. This goes back to my point earlier about this may make sense in a B2C context. If you think about like, what does 1% to 3% have to be? It has to be a massive market, like a consumer market where there's potentially millions of customers. And therefore, in a B2B context, you usually don't have, potentially millions of customers. I mean, even if you're a high volume, I mean, maybe you have 1 million, maybe you have a couple 100,000 companies that could buy your product. So 1% to 3% is, by the time you do the math on that, especially as you get higher ACVs, which those numbers, that denominator comes down even more, you're not really talking to, converting a whole lot of these customers. And then it causes all these other problems as well, because marketers are out there every day trying to get new logos, trying to improve their SEO, improve their paid marketing, their organic social reach, etc. And if you look at the amount of free users a customer has, right, assuming only 1% of them convert, you end up having this giant pile of free users. And it makes sense that the CMO or the head of marketing would be like, well, guys, what if we just try a little bit harder? What if we put a couple more carrots in here to get people to convert? But really what I found is that's an illusion. You really have a segment of customers that really don't value your full offering. Otherwise, they would have converted. And therefore, a bunch of energy, time, resources are spent trying to really optimize and get people over this free to paid hurdle, when we run into something in pricing called the penny gap, which is to go from free or 0 cents to the penny or 1 cent for a price is almost as hard as just finding a net new customer. And so it's this illusion or mirage that eventually, like, we're going to tip the scales and acquire all these net new customers. There's plenty of other reasons, but I'll stop there and see if there's any areas you want to dig in around what I've said already.
Well, what comes to mind is Dumb and Dumber when he says, "You're telling me there's a chance. You've been using my freemium for 6 months. Oh, maybe today's the day they'll convert," right? So that is some interesting math and statistics that you have there, that you're saying that if you are looking into doing that, do the time limited free trial, because that's the amount of time that they might convert from free to paid anyway. They have the urgency. If they're a serious buyer, they're like, okay, I want to use it, make sure that it's working for me. Okay, cool, I'm in. Versus if only 1% to 3% convert, now you're supporting all this free tier, and that costs time, energy, resources, and all that stuff. And so it seems like when we're talking about this, what's really like fun, exciting, fascinating to me is when I was a kid, I knew I wanted to be a programmer. I made all kinds of software, but I would go to like the bookstore, and I couldn't afford to buy anything because I was a kid, but I would read some of like the books, and I'd be like, oh, do I learn like programming? Do I learn like Perl or C++? And then there were these books on like software architecture and the design, and it kind of like ignited different parts of my brain. And what was even more fun is thinking about like, okay, you have this software, right? You have Microsoft Word, and it does all these cool things, but no one knows about it. And you have to like carefully, strategically position and kind of almost gamify, right? And like make it easier for them. And so my mind was blown when I was a kid, and I opened up Microsoft Word, and like, they're like, hey, here's a blank document. You mean I didn't have to like tell it I wanted a blank document? They're like, no, we shortcut that step for you. So I love little tidbits like that, right? Of saying like, well, we have this software, and in the good old days, they'd say, hey, here's a wizard, right? Here's the next button to get this set up. But it's like we have the software, we got to get people using it, and that way when they use it, then that's the stickiness, right? Then they'll stay with it. And even if they buy it, we want them to keep on buying the subscription. And so what do you have to say in that department as far as like, you have the SaaS software, You jump in, you help companies. Do they sometimes need help with just those bottlenecks and getting people using it and getting excited about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, so you're pointing to there's many aspects involved in taking users down what you might call a value path, right? So value path meaning, hey, I'm using I've never used a product before, and so now I need to get them to that first activation moment. And so there's a lot of work. It's one of these things I learned as a product manager, which is your onboarding is never done, right? Your onboarding is that hey, I've never used your product before, till two, I'm getting value out of it, meaning I've given you some amount of data. And so you'll see companies give you little sort of quizzes when you first launch the product, right? Imagine Asana does something like this. Hey, what's your role? Are you in engineering? Are you in product? Are you in marketing? Do you have how big is your team? And they're doing those questions explicitly so they can lead you to that aha moment quicker by pre-populating maybe a dashboard with the templates or the type of usage metrics that's most relevant to you as that type of persona. Say you're an engineer, right? It might have a certain set of templates or views that are particularly useful for you. And so that pattern exists all along the spectrum, meaning like if I'm in most SaaS companies have a offer configuration architecture we call good, better, best. You'd see it if you go to most SaaS pricing pages where there's multiple packages, sort of a starter, intermediate package, and maybe an enterprise call us. And companies want their customers to potentially upgrade between those tiers as well to get more capabilities. And so you may think you have, okay, well, it's not enough that we help people who never use the software to start paying us, but maybe we have customers who've been paying us for a year, and now we identify that, hey, there's the capabilities that we could get them to pay more for. And so there's all of those things that companies are constantly need to think about. In my current role, I tend to stay out of those weeds specifically. I've dealt with that much more as in my product management world, because that was much more of my role. But these days, I try not to get involved in the direct product workflows themselves.
Okay, well, fair enough. Well, in the spirit of focusing on where you do shine, right, and what does turn you on, and the results that you get for people, we're jumping all around talking about software and pricing and positioning and all that fun stuff. But in this conversation that Mr. Robert and Mr. Dan are having, what's the missing, hidden, invisible question? What should I be asking you? I just don't know what to ask you.
Well, that's a big question. Probably something along the lines of, what are the big areas of mistakes that people make when they think about pricing?
Okay, what are the areas of mistakes people make when they think about pricing?
Yeah, well, I would say the number one is treating pricing as simply putting a number on a tag. When it comes to SaaS pricing, most executives think that what you charge determines your success. In fact, who and how you charge determines your success. The price is rarely just about a number. Like, what I mean by that, we could have a really in-depth conversation of, should our prices end in fives or nines? Should this be $19 a seat or $29 a seat? And those conversations are fun and useful to a certain extent. But if you don't really understand how you're charging customers or have that well thought through, you're really missing the highest leverage opportunities. So before, like, just as a quick example, before I was mentioning something like the good, better, best model. So when I think about packaging in a couple of different elements, that would be the offer configuration. A lot of companies really struggle with, okay, we've defined offers, but customers still are confused when they come to buy. So the question there is, have you aligned your offers or tiers with relevant stories of who those offers are for? Have you just taken an inside view of, well, these products are expensive for us to support, so we put them in the higher tier? Well, your customers really don't. That's a very inside view of, your customers don't care how long it took you to develop those features or how much you have to pay OpenAI or Anthropic in order to get those AI capabilities out the door. They really care about, like, does this thing solve the job I need it to get done? And so really thinking through, how do we put our capabilities together in ways that resonate with customers? Are we charging the right price metric that scales with the value that a company might have. For example, you're using your Asana before, they charge per seat because oftentimes the amount of value you get from one of those project management tools scales with the amount of people on the team who are using it. But that's not always the case, right? There are many situations where seat is not the right pricing metric. And so you could really lose out on a lot of opportunity and incredible leverage if you get those decisions wrong. And so, where I would give guidance to folks, I would spend most of my time on what the price tag goes on and little time on what number goes on the price tag.
Ooh, I like that. That's a key insight. It's about the people, right? It's about the people and what they care about and the story that led them to you instead of just you and what you decided. And the whole discussion about, well, should my price end at like 99 or 95 or 97? Like, I always laugh at that too, right? Like when I was 10, my grandpa bought a Buick and he was like, it's got 7 cup holders. There was that era where like they started to add cup holders in all the cars. And I was thinking like, but if you got like a Ford Pinto or a Rolls Royce and you were like, okay, yeah, it's a Ford Pinto, but like, look how many cup holders. It's like you focus on the wrong thing, right? But it's kind of funny to chuckle about with as far as like, well, okay, you're looking at that last digit, but like, what about the rest of it, right? What about what's actually important? And we skated past AI really quick because, and I don't know if it's appropriate to ask you if you got something to say here, but my understanding is like, as far as people using AI to help with pricing, I understand you're against it. So is that something you feel like discussing here?
I'm happy to discuss whatever you think would be useful and valuable to your audience. Very much whatever is valuable to them. So there's a couple of different dimensions, and I just want to maybe put some distinctions in place just so I can clarify for us in the audience where we're talking about, because when we talk about AI and pricing, there's multiple different interesting conversations going on in the world. So one is sort of what we're seeing with the sort of AI foundation model companies and their pricing. This would be like OpenAI versus Google versus Anthropic. There's the AI enabled applications and all the pricing decisions that we're seeing folks go through there in the marketplace as they ship new AI enabled capabilities, maybe leveraging those underlying foundational models in the first part. And then there's potentially what you also meant, which is how do companies, or how can they use these powerful LLMs or other models in order to help them with their pricing. So those are kind of 3 different areas. Is there a particular one you wanted to dive into?
Well, I did want to dive into like companies like using AI to try to like guess their pricing, but you brought up, but instead of that, like I sort of want to throw that in the garbage, right? Because like the whole what we've seen with these AI companies, it's really been kind of fascinating, and I've never talked about it with anyone. The idea that like OpenAI, especially, right? That they're kind of the most like popularized as far as they're like, hey, here's this free level, and here's all these features. And then if you want the pay, I mean, it's sort of like freemium, unfortunately. But there's like if you pay, you get the better stuff. And then as they continue to innovate, they kind of move the last year's version down to the free level. So like, do you think about that? Because like the AI pricing, especially like with these platforms, it seems so like breakneck, fast paced. How can they keep going like this?
Yeah, so OpenAI is an interesting case study. There's a couple of things in what you said that are worth talking about. So the first thing is, you're right, they are using a freemium approach. I don't have any inside information. I don't know anybody at OpenAI who's working on this, so I can't say for certain. But they are definitely using a freemium approach, and that seems to be, at least right now, the standard for all of those foundation model companies. What I think is happening again, so if we look at just ChatGPT, where they've really had the most success currently is they are now sort of the name equivalent of consumers. When you ask about AI, they just say AI, ChatGPT. They're kind of like the facial tissue Kleenex of that world, right? Or search. Google became synonymous with search. And so they are really in that B2C world. The other thing I think is going on, I often hate when people talk about freemium, they'll make this terrible argument that is, but the data. They're like, and it's very much an underpants gnomes. If anyone doesn't get the reference, there's an old South Park episode where there's these characters called the underpants gnomes. Step 1, collect underpants. Step 2, question mark. Step 3, profit. That's usually how the argument goes for people when they suggest a freemium approach. This might be one of the first cases I've ever seen where that argument holds water. I don't know if you recall, about 12 months ago, before the what quote unquote reasoning models came out, what is with now the O1, O3 models from OpenAI, or the latest versions, the equivalents from the other providers. There was this whole story about we've run out of data to train these models. And so I think that these companies are very much aware of this and understanding that humans interacting with these AI systems is a gold mine when they've literally sucked the rest of the world's data from the internet and are just desperate for additional data sources to make these models better, to make them more human. Because you can imagine, right, as they are able to get signal from good or worse responses, as they're able to see engagement metrics, that's able to make their model better. But then also humans are typing into these models, right? So that's all new text that they can consume. I think so that's the kind of the freemium side of things. The other thing that's interesting about OpenAI, and I think worth pointing out, they recently, I guess it was in, the last 6 months, everything's a blur in that world. It's moving so quickly, but they released their pro plan. Because when you remember they launched, they had, it was free, and then it was $20 per month. And then they released a pro plan at $200 a month. And that caused a lot of conversation and waves for multiple reasons. But I think the interesting thing about that is it really shows the ability to understand that when you're talking about power users, those customers aren't just using 50% more or 100% more. They might be using 10x more than your regular normal customers. And so why is this relevant? Because most B2B companies, when they're thinking about adding a mid-market or enterprise plan, say you started in selling to very small businesses and now you start selling to mid-market, there's a real reticence to be anchored on this idea of like, well, our current offer is $10 per seat. Let's just use that as an example. Therefore, we can't charge more than $20 per seat. But the thing is, that buyer has a different willingness to pay. They have different considerations entirely. And so what OpenAI found was that, hey, while 10x more per month may seem outrageous, there were people who were willing to pay that much. In fact, now we've seen that Anthropic, and I believe Google as well, have created something similar. And at least on AI Twitter, there are people on AI Twitter who are paying those high tiers across all those providers simultaneously.
Nice.
So there are customers out there that are not just, again, a 50% step change in usage or value or willingness to pay from your baseline, but could be 10x or more. And that's, I think, a really good lesson to keep in mind, because there's often, we think about psychology of pricing, the 5s and 9s or 7 cup holders is your grandfather example. We tend to think about anchoring as being a problem for consumers, right? Like, oh, why is the 9? Because it signals it's a bargain. There's a whole bunch of research on that side of the fence. But there's often just as much anchoring on the side of the business, where we get very emotionally attached to what we're already charging for our products, as if that number was handed down from Olympus by the gods on stone tablets, and that is the real price, and that anything else has to be a slight deviation from that price, when in fact the reality the reality or the value is in the minds of your customers. Value, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder, and so we need to understand it's not what we think, it's what those customers think who we're actually trying to sell this to.
Very cool. And it seems to be keep coming back to that lesson, right? It's not about us, it's about them. And get over your stuff, right? Don't let those psychological hangups in the 9 and the 7 and the way you've been doing the pricing hold you up, especially when you have these companies like OpenAI doing amazing things. And that $200 pro plan, what got me to buy it was they were saying that like they lose money on some of the pro users. The one that's just like use it 24 hours a day. I'm like, cool, that'll be me. And I bought it, I think like 3 months ago. I've been cranking on it just nonstop. I've been getting my money's worth out of it. And so it's like you're saying there's these different subgroups, right? There's different buckets of people. and there's like emotional and storytelling attached to them. And man, what a fun conversation, right? What a great thought experiment. And so how does somebody know if after they've listened to this, they've got some ideas, got some starting points where they're like, hey, I really need Dan to help my company just get this pricing, this B2B SaaS stuff figured out? How does an organization know if they're a right fit for you? And if they are, how do they reach out and what for?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in the beginning, I focus on B2B software companies. So if you're in the B2B software space, happy to have a conversation. They can reach out to me through my website, producttranquility.com. I'm also heavily on, probably too much on LinkedIn, so happy to connect with folks on LinkedIn, Dan Balcauski, and happy to have a conversation and see if there's a fit.
Very cool. And so that website that you mentioned was producttranquility.com. They help high volume B2B SaaS CEOs define pricing and packaging for new products. You can grow your revenue, increase your ACV, accelerate your customer acquisition, all of that with minimal distraction so you can get back to scaling your business. That's producttranquility.com. There's blog posts, there's testimonials, but what Dan really wants you to do is go to that contact form at the bottom and say, hey, Dan, help me with my B2B software, help me with my pricing. Let's increase the revenue, the customers. Let's just figure out what change can be made, what we can do. And you said on LinkedIn, that's Dan Balcauski. And I love what you said to me when we first met, Dan. You said, think about a cow with a bell on its neck wearing some skis. And man, what a visual, right? Hard to forget that, but it's kind of difficult to spell. So if we're not watching visually and we want to find Dan Balcauski on LinkedIn, that last name is Balcauski, Dan Balcauski. He dispels B2B SaaS pricing illusions. That's linkedin.com/in/Balcauski. And producttranquility.com is that website where you can dive in and learn all about his different services. He's got the SaaS Pricing Assessor, the SaaS Pricing Optimizer, and the SaaS Pricing Success Program, designed to help guide one or more team members in creating optimized offers for your product, support your team in making more intelligent pricing decisions that generate higher profits, reduce sales friction, and better communicate the value your product provides to your market. It's something we need to do, and not all of us have it dialed in, or maybe it's been a while, deserves some revisiting. And so as people are headed to producttranquility.com, Mr. Dan, it's time for the end part of the show, the scary part of the show, where I try to put you on the spot and ask about a fun quote or lesson that has served you. So what comes to mind for a fun quote or lesson?
Oh man. Well, I had this is going to sound a little slightly repetitive, but I had a business coach who really drilled into me this idea that business is not about you, it's about them. So what does that mean? We tend to get stuck in our heads, especially if we're in a business role where maybe you're having to talk to prospects and sell, or you're talking to internal stakeholders. The idea is, instead of worrying about the thing that you're trying to get across, worrying about your agenda, making it as much about what that person wants and that person needs in that particular conversation. And it's a simple idea, but it's incredibly powerful when you can apply it regularly to your business. It has this interesting effect psychologically as well, that it tends to remove a lot of pressure we take on ourselves to perform, to impress others, when instead we're really focused on making sure the other person gets their goals met.
Of course, you're helping them. You're providing that solution. You're thinking about their wants and needs, and but it's a valuable lesson that's worth repeating. It's not about you; it's about them, their wants and needs, the solution that will get them and their company to where they need to go. And as we're thinking about that, it's time to go to producttranquility.com. Right now, you go there, you scroll down, and you can SaaS up your pricing today, have an introductory consultation, and that's Dan Balcauski on LinkedIn. Mr. Dan, what a fun conversation. I had a blast. I hope you did too, and I hope we learned and taught some stuff. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Robert. It was great.